Hello, this is Dale Matthews. I'm joined by Mike Jones, and what a show we have for you today. It's really going to be interesting. Mike?
Yes, it will be. We've got
It,
a really big shoe.
no, this is true. This is going to be a very interesting show. I'm going to start off, we're going to talk about guns, gun control, gun freedom, all the various terms. But I have to start with a couple things that happened today on this subject. And that is, we look at Facebook. Mike especially looks at Facebook, and Facebook is a mixed bag. You get crazy people like us, and you get normal people. So here's one of the crazies. This is what was printed on one of the Facebook sites. Says this is from Josephine County Neighborhood Chats, written by John Scott. Now remember, this is about gun control or gun freedom. Don't believe all the school shootings are real just because you hear it, H-E-R-E, just because you hear it on the Communist News Network. The Red Army faction invented fabricated political wars in the 1930s. Don't believe people that just stand in front of a camera and claim things, like the Sandy Hook hoax. Just a political agenda act that FEMA put together. It's the main reason they integrate with everyone.
Yeah. You know what? Listen,
That's sad.
If you're a false flagger and you're watching this show, please stop watching this show because you know what? Here's the bottom line: they don't have to create stuff. We have created a society that breeds these type of freakazoids. Okay, and that's why we're in the situation that we're in. And so there'll be plenty of more coming on behind this. We don't need to invent fake ones. The president just asked to have manufactured speeches on hand, ready to launch with at a minute's notice, as though it's coming off the top of his head.
The new Minutemen.
Yes, and in order to take advantage, to not let the crisis go to waste. That's what's going on here. If you're going to search for conspiracy, that's where it lies, such as it is.
The Red Army faction, Mike.
Yes, these false flag operations, it's crazy on Facebook with these things. That they have videos of people that look very much like some of the people involved in this that were involved in Sandy Hook. You know, it's looking at them from a distance, and it's just grainy enough to go, wow, look, it's possibly the same person. Oh, a woman, a housewife in a ponytail. How often could that happen? No, snap out of it, people. It's a crazy enough world. There's plenty of whack jobs out there.
These things, it's interesting to note that everybody's using, well, everybody, a lot of people are using some kind of symbolism. You would think, some people would think, this semi-famous image over my shoulder here is something that promotes the idea of patriotism and the Second Amendment. No, this is from an anti-gun, pro-control side advertisement. Really? How about America's all about guns? This image could fit both sides. So both sides is what we're about tonight. We are doing the best that we can. I was just on the phone with someone saying, listen, there's a Hillary Clinton versus Bernie Sanders debate coming up. Now, that's two sides of the Democrats, but I'd really like to see what people have to say about that are Democrats or Bernie Sanders supporters. We never hear from these people. What's up with that?
His Democrats and Bernie Sanders supporters, as though they are not the from the same party.
Well, Bernie Sanders is a socialist. He's from the Socialist Party, like Keith Heck.
No. He is a Democrat. I realize that he's a socialist, or he at least at one point was a socialist, but he is a Democrat now.
No, wait a minute. Now
he's running for the Democratic nomination.
Now, Hillary Clinton has a D after her name.
Right.
So does the president. Bernie Sanders has an I after his name. What does that mean?
Yes, but he's running for the Democratic nomination.
He is that. That's true.
And to be honest, in my personal opinion, No, there isn't any difference. Listen, they had Debbie Wasserman Schultz on the news the other day, and Chris Matthews asked her, what's the difference between a socialist and a Democrat? She literally could not answer it. She
All
was
right.
like,
Well, I asked
humana.
elections ago when Herman Bertziger was running for state senator, to bring it back locally. I asked the head of the Democrat Party. His name is, I'd love to name my cat this, Diefendorfer. What a great name for a cat. Sorry, Diefen. And I said, can you please tell me, in Josephine County, what's the difference between Democrats and Republicans in Josephine County only? And he said, we have it on tape, I don't really see much of a difference. You don't see much of a difference, and he's the head of the Democrat Party. That's what he said. He never said that. Yes, he did. We have it on tape.
Yes. Well,
Bertziger said the same.
I would call out to both of these parties to distinguish yourself.
Oh, you think?
You know, maybe you try that.
Yeah. Okay. So we have another local perspective. I don't agree with everything she's saying, but she did a very good job this morning of saying it clearly. Go ahead and play that, Mike.
Judy Reynolds. I live in Josephine County. I'm going to talk today a little bit about Roseburg and about guns. I don't have any answers about Roseburg, but I do have a lot of questions. And one of my questions is, locally, is why, when there was a hearing held recently about expanded background checks, 40 people spoke against the meeting commissioners held, and there was not one person speaking for those background checks, except for one county commissioner. I think guns, it's a very intimidating subject. It's very difficult for people who want greater gun control to walk into a room full of people who are gun owners, and they're very angry. But I don't think that this explains why our county sheriff stood up and publicly proclaimed that he was not going to enforce the new law for expanded background checks. That's where I draw the line. And that's where I feel that we have the impact of an organization called the NRA. Most gun owners seem to support the NRA. But I would like to try to build a bridge to two segments of that population. There's basically three types of people, I think, who own guns in our county and elsewhere. The first are homeowners who want to protect their property. The second are people who want to hunt, target shoot. And the third, and far more sketchy, are the people who have quote unquote gun collections, but who are actually building arsenals and amassing ammunition because they're anti-government and anti-regulation of any kind. And this group especially has been sold the paranoid delusion by the NRA that quote unquote any restriction on guns is going to lead to a slippery path where we will take away your guns. The government will take away your guns. And I'm here to tell you, homeowners and you hunters, you need to let go of that one, because that is not going to happen. We have 88 guns in this country per 100 people. Guns aren't going away. But what needs to go away is this stonewalling about any kind of regulation on guns. Right now, the NRA blocks everything related to gun trafficking. Gun traffickers are free and clear to do what they will. Gun dealerships do not have to keep inventory. This means they do not have to keep track of what they buy or sell, and it means that gun traffickers, they can sell to them with impunity. The list goes on. You need to check out the NRA and check out the company you're keeping. Thank you very much.
Okay. Should I start?
Yes,
start at the top of the list.
Please do.
Okay. Which commissioner was this that was advocating for the expanded background checks?
I go to all of their meetings, and I have to tell you honestly, Mike, I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't remember that.
She must have been at a meeting that we weren't at, or maybe. But I have seen Commissioner Walker make noises to this effect.
Now, if there
Okay.
was not a quorum, then we're probably not going to go and videotape. Probably not, because we're there every time there's a quorum because it's county business.
Mm.
I don't recall that meeting, so
Well,
sorry.
maybe she was at some event that we weren't privy to. And then why would she fear being in a? She was in a room today, by the way, full of gun owners, and it's saying they're angry. They might have been mad that perhaps that they feel that their rights are going to be infringed upon, but generally speaking, legal gun owners, they don't attack people in public with their guns. So you got nothing to worry about there.
Well, I had experience with that, and Keith, heck, he didn't have a gun, as far as I know. But I can say that she. A lot of people would feel a bit intimidated being in a room where there were other people that had a different point of view. We experienced that just recently. I didn't feel intimidated at all, and I'm sure you didn't. But when we went to that meeting about the mineral withdrawal, there were, hot-headed people that were really going to give them a piece of their mind, and they didn't say a word. They just sat there, in my personal opinion, cowering in fear. She didn't.
Yes. Right. No, and that's a good point. Now the sheriff has addressed her issue with him not enforcing SB 941, and that is the expanded background checks legislation. He doesn't have the resources to do that. He barely has the resources to operate the jail and keep one or two cars out on the road. And he said, I'm not going to do that. However, he did say,
let me take part two, what he did say.
Okay.
Part two is he did say, however, if he did have the resources, that would be completely different. Oh, really?
Yeah. So you take this all for what it's worth. Also, it's 90 guns, not 88. Just so
okay, let me write that down.
90 per 100. But her story about the regulation of gun dealers and people just selling willy-nilly. No.
I wondered about that. I thought, wait a minute, they don't have to keep an inventory? First of all, what kind of company doesn't keep an inventory?
Yes.
You don't have an inventory?
And also, every gun that they sell, even at gun shows, and it's been this way forever, everybody has to get a background check.
No, colonial America gun shows. Come on.
No. Okay. Yeah, we're going back to the definition of permanent again.
Yes, that's right. The judge will be on our case.
Is within my lifetime, every time I've been at a gun show, anybody who's buying a gun in California, you had to wait the waiting period. And that's why rarely anybody ever did it. You can take your gun home today here, but you're going to get what's called an instant check, and they call in and they run you. And believe me, with the speed of computers, they can get, do a internal inspection on you over the phone. Believe me, they know what you've been up to. And so that's just out of whack. That's hyperbole from the anti-gun crowd. Now, this issue as to whether or not the people like the president want to take your guns. Now, want to take your gun sounds like a simplified thing, and you're some sort of toothless hick and you're buying into that. No, they do want gun confiscation. And we will show evidence of that coming up in these videos, because they cite in the video coming up, starting with the president and then later with others, that they have an affinity for, and they even cited in the speech that, there are people with solutions out there just like us, our allies, the UK and Australia. Well, what happened in those places? Gun confiscation. That they did a total ban. So this idea that these people are crazy for worrying about having their guns taken away, that's not crazy. He's talking about it. He's talking about that in the same sentences as the idea of a solution.
So what we're doing tonight is we're playing pro and con, pro and con. We're playing crazy, which we started with, sane, crazy, sane.
Yes, but we're totally unbiased about this.
That's right. So now we're going to go to the President of the United States. Go ahead. Take it away, Mr. President, please.
There is a gun for roughly every man, woman, and child in America. So how can you, with a straight face, make the argument that more guns will make us safer? We know that states with the most gun laws tend to have the fewest gun deaths. So the notion that gun laws don't work or just will make it harder for law-abiding citizens and criminals will still get their guns, it's not borne out by the evidence. We know that other countries, in response to one mass shooting, have been able to craft laws that almost eliminate mass shootings. Friends of ours, allies of ours, Great Britain, Australia, countries like ours.
This is one of those problems where we know the solution. We see those parents grieve. We see those kids dying. We read about cell phones ringing still in the pockets of dead kids because their parents are still trying to reach them because they've heard about the shooting. And we know what to do about it. We know this huge body of social science and research that gun control works on gun violence as effectively as antibiotics work on bacterial infections. If we had gun laws like the gun laws...
I don't know about that.
Which is to say, not perfectly, but overwhelmingly, and almost all of the time.
Overwhelmingly?
Yes.
Well,
And if we had gun laws-
this shooter yesterday didn't have assault weapons. He didn't have any weapon that the Democrats want to outlaw.
He had
And
17...
he would pass any background check that you can imagine,
He had
like most mass shooters would. They pass background checks because they generally haven't committed crimes in the past.
But Matt, this is exactly like saying, you see, we give sick kids aspirin and they don't get better. That proves medicine doesn't work. What we do know from the experience of Canada, what we know from the experience of Australia, where they had a horrific mass shooting and then they cut down, they brought in really stringent and effective gun control laws, and there hasn't been a single mass shooting.
Yeah, but that's not what even the liberals are talking about in this country, doing what they did in Australia. That's the difference, is that they're still not getting at the root of the problem, the Second Amendment.
Well, but the Second Amendment, I don't think is a root problem. You have to remember,
Really?
Bill, yes, you have to remember, Bill, that the interpretation, the radical misreading of the Second Amendment that we live under now, which says the Second Amendment guarantees rights to individuals to own guns, is extremely recent. It only took up 7 years ago in Scalia's Heller decision. Before that, for almost 200 years, the consensus of constitutional scholars on all sides and of the Supreme Court was that the Second Amendment, which after all begins talking about a well-regulated militia, referenced a well-regulated militia, that it only protected the rights of the states to form militias.
Okay.
Wow. Boy, there's a lot there.
There's a lot here. Now, I would encourage viewers take notes during this, because we're going to hit every single one of these points that they're making here is addressed later in the show. So like the president says, well, everywhere where they have gun control, we see lesser violent crime or whatever. Well, that does get addressed in some of these, it's especially cities in the U.S. like Chicago, Detroit, New Orleans. These are crime-ridden cities that arguably have very stringent gun control. And then also this man's interpretation, I don't know where he was during my lifetime, but I don't remember this just changing 7 years ago about all of a sudden, well, it was, everybody thought it was just for a well-regulated militia, but now, this radical has interpreted it as something different. I'm amazed that he's a journalist. But
well, I'm going to bring in just one other thing that I said in a previous show. I'm not sure that I'm entirely comfortable with everybody packing on campus. However, I will say this. I brought this up. If it's a little repetitive, well, it's a free show. And that is, it used to be that if you had a heart attack at your workplace or in a school, that you had to wait for some emergency services people to come with a defib unit, a defibrillator unit.
You're getting better.
Well, thank you. I'm not saying it wrong, I hope. Now, many places, including campuses, they'll have a defib unit. That's the cure for saying that wrong. On the wall in a couple different places. Aren't you glad that they're there and that you don't have to wait for someone to come from 15, 20 minutes away, even 10 minutes away? You know, the time is ticking. Well, the other thing that's ticking, and not bomb, shut up. The other thing that's ticking is if you don't have any kind of way of stopping a shooter, no way at all. Scissors, really? Everybody hide under a desk? Oh, yeah. Put a lampshade on your head and stand still? Right. I'm sure that those people at the UCC campus, maybe all of them, don't like the idea of guns on campus, but weren't they grateful when someone did show up with training that had a weapon and stopped this guy? Well, they shot him, and then apparently he went around a corner and shot himself. When these people go on these campuses, you already know the answer. They're not looking to, well, maybe they're looking to rack up a score, but imagine if some kids were trying to rack up a score on some kind of machine and it put their initials on there. Oh, I'm top. You know, like a tagger, you know, on the people that spray stuff on a wall. Their name, they want their name out there. Well, if that never showed their initials, they wouldn't want to do this game anymore. They want the fame. So this guy, this kid that did this, he has the President of the United States mentioning him. I mean, if you're going to go out and you feel like you just can't live this life anymore, to have the president mention you, even if it's negatively. So maybe what we should be doing is I don't know if it needs to be in case of fire of shooter break glass, you know, I don't know. But wouldn't it be nice if there was some local presence of something you don't want to use, of some kind of gun, where if there's somebody, you can do something about it, especially with adults that already have the approval from the state to carry. And now you're going to tell them, we're going to take care of you. Final point, if you're going to tell people, leave your weapon in your car, we're going to take care of you, you better take care of them.
Yeah. Agreed. Now, this next piece here is Bill Whittle, and he's a very smart guy, and he's going to talk about statistics on gun ownership and violent crime, murder, homicide, that sort of thing. Now, I hope by the end of this you think that we've been even-handed here, because so far we had, anti-gun, and now here's the pro-gun piece.
Oh, and this is a killer video. Oh, sorry. You know what I mean.
It is not rocket science.
Oh, wait just a second.
Oh, that's Christine Amanpour. We're going to give the gun control side one more chance.
That's right. They're going to get
Bill
one
Whittle's
more shot at
video is so revealing. I was really amazed. I didn't know any of that stuff. Go ahead. Let Christine bring it on.
Okay.
Now,
yes.
Everybody,
There's
please
okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Everybody, please keep in mind. NPR type video. Is that what is this the NPR?
No,
this is not.
This is Christiane Amanpour, and she is interviewing John Howard, the former Prime Minister of Australia.
Oh.
He's the one who was the Prime Minister when they enacted these stringent gun laws. In other words, gun confiscation and destruction. Back when that happened.
We're bending over backwards to be fair about this, and we're going to give them another chance to make their point, because when this other guy comes in, you're going to say, oh, none of these videos really compare with that, though there are people that disagree with it. Go ahead and play Christine Amanpour. Go ahead.
It is not rocket science. Study after study here in the United States and around the world show incontrovertible evidence that where there is more gun control, there are fewer gun deaths. Overseas, the mass killing of school children in the town of Dunblane in the UK in 1996 brought swift new gun control that's dramatically reduced fatalities. And after 35 people were killed in Australia that same year, the newly elected Conservative Prime Minister John Howard went to the country to appeal for and to ram through changes. And there's not been a mass shooting in Australia since. During his recent visit to the United States, I asked Mr. Howard just how he navigated the tricky political shoals of gun control where he comes from. Prime Minister Howard, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining me.
Great pleasure.
Let me ask you, when you see the results of what you did in Australia and in other places where gun control has been enacted, and you're here in the United States, what do you make of how hard this is in the US?
Well, I certainly understand that the United States is different from Australia, and what I am happy to do is explain what we did in Australia, and I hope that contributes to the debate. But I don't come here with any lectures.
I hear you loud and clear. Let me just pose you then this quote and then ask you how you did it in Australia. The facts, as I said, seem to be clear. More gun laws, less gun deaths. Quote, a higher number of firearm laws in a state are associated with a lower rate of firearm fatalities in the state overall, and for suicides and homicides individually. Now, that's from the Journal of American Medical Association this March. How did you do it then in Australia after that terrible massacre in Tasmania?
Well, it was because that massacre was so terrible, I was able to use the authority I had as a newly elected Prime Minister with a big majority to force the states that had the legal control over automatic and semi-automatic weapons to introduce a national ban, and it involved a buyback. The buyback of guns was financed through a tax levy, and we bought back what would be the equivalent in American terms of 40 million weapons. We've got a much smaller population, so there were a smaller number bought back in Australia. As a result of this, there has been a marked decline in the number of murders involving firearms. There's been a decline in the suicide rate, particularly amongst young males, which was very high in rural areas of Australia in the mid-90s. Now, we started with a lower gun death rate, and I'm not saying that everything we did automatically translates, but our experience was that if you take guns out of circulation, you do reduce the number of deaths.
You say there are obviously clear differences between the United States and Australia. One, of course, is the gun culture. How big was the gun culture in Australia?
The gun culture was nowhere near as big in Australia as it was in the United States. And of course, Australia is not a Bill of Rights country. We don't have a Bill of Rights. We don't have constitutional guarantees in relation to these things. However, doesn't alter the fact that our murder rate using guns has fallen, and there's not much doubt in my mind that it's the availability of guns that causes such a high rate of murder using weapons. So many people have a snap point, and if that snap point arrives and you've got a gun handy, you're far more likely to use it to kill somebody than you are a knife or some other instrument.
Was it difficult, though, as a new Conservative Prime Minister to enact this kind of encompassing law? I mean, remember, I've read, of course, that your federal government, the national government, doesn't have any broad control over what happens to guns, apart from the import of guns. How difficult was it for you as a Conservative Prime Minister to do this?
Well, it was difficult with two of the states, one in particular that had a Conservative government, but they came to the party, and but it was quite hard, and it probably contributed to the rise of a right-wing populist party called One Nation, which did us some damage at the subsequent election. But we were able to overcome that, and I think at the end of the day, those who opposed it realised that if we hadn't have got our way, we'd have probably held a referendum or national plebiscite to transfer the constitutional power from the states to the federal government. And the mood of the nation at the time was such that that referendum would have been carried.
Well, again, there's a huge difference between the US and Australia. In the United States, 10.26 deaths per 100,000, while in Australia, that figure is 1.06. So it is a massive difference in terms of the level of violence. I know you said you do not want to lecture the United States, the Congress, state legislators, whatever, but looking at the debate over this, the very public debate since Newtown especially, what do you think the US could reasonably do, and do you think it'll happen here?
Well, that is a matter for Americans and your president and your legislators to decide. All I wish to do is explain what happened in Australia, to be objective. Bear in mind that even before these national laws were brought in 1996, our murder rate using guns, murder rate generally was lower, much lower than in the United States.
Prime Minister Howard, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
Seems somewhat compelling to me, Mike, what he's saying.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. The thing that I would say is that now those people have absolutely no protection against a tyrannical government should one take place in Australia. And people go, oh, yeah, you're crazy. You're overstating it. Listen, in the last 100 years, 100 million people or more have been murdered by their own government, far, far more than any private owner of a gun ever creates in any part of the world. Hundreds of millions of people have been murdered by their own governments. And this Constitution here is the one that protects you from that sort of thing. I personally find that to be valuable. Perhaps those people will get by just fine down under. That's their business, quite frankly.
Well, to bring it back more locally, just like I said a moment ago, I think that those students at UCC in Roseburg were grateful that somebody showed up with a weapon. Okay, so again, if you're going to say disarm yourself, well, okay, and we'll keep you safe, then you better keep us safe. And if you are not able to do that in a county such as Josephine County, then back off.
Well, and it isn't exactly true that they don't have any issues with this sort of thing, because yesterday, or actually, I believe this was the day after the shooting in Roseburg, there was a Australian authorities arrest 5 men in connection with fatal shooting in Sydney, which happened on Friday of last week.
Okay, so now we're going to show a good video. I think it's a pretty compelling video from the other side. There's certainly people who are going to question some parts of this, as they did these last couple of videos we showed, but we're going to show that now because we're trying to show you both sides.
Listen, if anything, we're bending over backwards on the anti-gunner side here.
Now, we all know, I mean, because we've told you that there are certain sites, Facebook sites, for example, who will tolerate somebody saying exactly what they believe. They will cut you off, completely stop you from talking in America if you say anything they don't like. Really. So some people are not going to want to watch this now because this shows the other side. You know, just snap out of it. Go ahead, Mike.
You know, every time there's a shooting in America, our moral betters on the left immediately ammo up the assault rifle of their rhetorical arsenal, namely our country's sick, twisted obsession with personal firearms, our adolescent psychosexual, dangerous and frankly embarrassing when facing our European film critic friends, American gun culture. So, hopping over to the ever-reliable Wikipedia, for example, we discovered that when it comes to per capita gun ownership, the USA does in fact top the list in glory. When measured as the number of guns per 100 residents, the US comes in first at 90. 90 guns per 100 residents. Evidence for the progressives on the left that they do in fact live in the murder capital of the world, because when it comes to gun ownership, America is number one with a bullet, with by far the highest per capita gun ownership in the world. 90 guns per 100 people is half again more than the number 2 spot held by Serbia with 58. Now, all we have to do to prove the left-wing progressive weenie case for banning guns is to do a quick search for the per capita murder rate. And sure enough, leading the number 2 country, again, by about half again more, with 90 murders per 100,000 people is Honduras. Socialist gun-controlled Honduras. Because even though America has by far the highest per capita gun ownership rate, we do not have the highest per capita murder rate. And unfortunately for the progressive leftist argument, we're not second either. Or third. In fact, when it comes to per capita murders, Team USA didn't even make the top 5. As a matter of fact, we didn't even make the top 10, or the top 20, or the top 30, or the top 40. We're not in the top 50 per capita murders. Gun Culture America is not in the top 60 nations in terms of per capita murders, or the top 70, or even the top 80, or the top 90. Of the 218 nations and territories listed for per capita murders, the United States of America, Murderville, USA, did not break the top 100. We are, with 4.7 murders per 100,000 people in 2012, number 111. 111th place puts us near the top of the bottom half of all the nations and territories in the world when it comes to total per capita murders, and virtually all, if not all, of those nations ranked higher than us are big state socialist utopias with stringent gun control laws. How tragically disappointing that must be for our moral superiors, and unfortunately for the left, it gets a lot worse, because 111th place, America's murder rate of 4.7 per 100,000 citizens, is artificially much higher than it should be, because it includes so many deadly, murderous, toxic places, like number 1 on the list of highly gun-controlled, democratically governed since the Stone Age murder pits, like Detroit, Michigan. Detroit, with strict gun control laws, has a per capita murder rate of 54.6 murders per 100,000 citizens. If Detroit were its own country, it would just beat Venezuela for second as the most murderous country in the world, behind Honduras. America's 111th place, 4.7 murder per 100,000 people, also includes, in order, democratically controlled, heavily gun-controlled New Orleans with 53.2 murders per 100,000, St. Louis with 35.5, Baltimore with 34.9, Newark with 34.4, Oakland with 31.8, followed by Stockton 23.7, Kansas City 22.6, Philadelphia 21.5, Cleveland 21.3, Memphis 20.2, and Atlanta 19.0, and of course Chicago with 18.5 murders per 100,000 people per year. America's per capita average of 4.7 murders includes all of these high crime areas. The first city to appear in gun-mad Texas is Dallas, which isn't even in the top 20. America's overall average of 4.7 is as low as it is because of places like Plano, Texas. It's the last city on the list with a murder rate of 0.4. Now, having been to Plano, Texas several times, I can tell you with confidence that virtually every home in Plano, Texas has an entire arsenal of AR-15 assault rifles, semi-automatic shotguns, 30-06 hunting rifles. They got 45s, 357s, they got 38s, they've got 9mm. They have an assortment of 22s for the kids to practice with, not to mention every species of tomahawk, bowie knife, hunting knife, jackknife, bayonet, switchblade. They've got pointy rocks, they've got sharp sticks. The per capita murder rate in Gun Nut Central is 0.4 per 100,000. If the United States of America as a nation had the same murder rate as Plano, Texas, we would not be 111 out of 218. We'd be 211 out of 218, well below Switzerland at 0.6, half of Germany, Spain, and Denmark at 0.8 murders, and well below half of New Zealand, the Netherlands, Austria, Italy, France, and Australia. If all of America had the murder rate of the gun nut capital of Gun Culture USA, Plano, Texas, then America's per capita murder rate would be 1/4 of those murderous, violent, rampaging, death-worshipping Belgians with their horrific 1.6 murders per 100,000. So maybe it's not the guns. Maybe it's the people holding the guns. We now return you to your regularly scheduled programming.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, we are regularly scheduled. We're on every single night. So did you notice that the number 4 country in the world carrying guns was Switzerland? And also, they're one of the very lowest per capita murder rates. Switzerland.
Yes. And listen, those are not just guns. Those are fully automatic assault rifles. Not like what they say is an assault rifle here, which is a semi-automatic. Those are issued to them by the government. They are mandated to learn how to use them, And so every home has at least one of those if they have several people that are of military age, because they are the militia in that country. If something happens that Switzerland needs defense, they're going to call up their militia, which is their people, and they're all trained.
Okay, so some of you may have looked at that and said, that was pretty compelling. Well, you haven't seen our next video yet, which may very well
put you to sleep. It might put you to sleep.
All right. So here's the thing. NPR, I like NPR, but it's a lot slower than Bill Whittle. And you can expect, okay, so we all need to calm down, take your tranquil medicine, and get into the mood of
No, don't do that.
And get into the mood of a European
movie. You'll miss the rest
movie
of the show if you do that.
Where things are quite a bit slower. Let's all put us a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Let's all put on our sweaters, and let's now pay attention to what NPR has to say about this subject. Mike?
Back in the early 90s, the Centers for Disease Control was funding plenty of research into gun safety. The studies found that people in homes with guns had a higher likelihood of violent death in the home than people in homes without guns. The NRA did not like that research, and they lobbied supportive members of Congress who turned around and banned the CDC from funding research that might, quote, advocate or promote gun control. And that story is the subject of the final installment in our series this week, Political Science, Where Evidence and Ideology Collide. And our guest is Dr. Fred Rivara. He's a professor of pediatrics and epidemiology at the University of Washington at Seattle's Children's Hospital. Rivara is the guy, along with Dr. Arthur Kellerman, who found the conclusion that today has become almost a cliche in the debate. If you have a gun in the home, you're actually less safe on average than if you don't. And that means Dr. Rivara saw firsthand the chilling effects that came from that congressional crackdown on gun research and how it still intimidates scientists today.
We did a series of studies back in the late 80s and early 90s. What we did is we looked at homes where there was a homicide that occurred, and then also went to homes in the neighborhood around the block where there was no homicide. We sent out experienced interviewers and asked them a series of questions, including whether or not there was a gun in the home. And we found out that having the gun in the home was associated with a significant increase, about a threefold increase in the risk of homicide occurring in the home from any means. The most common reason that people have a gun is because they have it for home protection. They feel like it is important to protect themselves and their family from harm. Unfortunately, the data indicate that having a gun in the home is associated with both an increased risk of homicide, but even more importantly, an increased risk of suicide. We know that, for example, if there's a gun in the home, that the risk of suicide among adolescents and young adults is increased tenfold.
Now, can you walk me through the experience a little bit? Back in 1993, when Dr. Kellerman and you were on that team, released this series of articles, largely in the New England Journal of Medicine, the National Rifle Association reacted. Can you walk me through the experience, what happened with the NRA and what happened with your research?
Well, I think it's important for you to, again, emphasize that this work was all published in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is then and still is one of the most respected journals in the world. So it really underwent peer review. It was felt to be very solid and worthwhile research. The CDC stood by our research. They had funded the research, and they stood by it. Unfortunately, it raised the attention of the National Rifle Association, who then worked with pro-gun members of Congress to essentially stop funding of firearm research. What happened was the 10 senators in Congress at that time approached Senator Arlen Specter, who was the chair of the Health and Human Services Subcommittee, and he approached the director of the Centers for Disease Control and discussed the idea that this research was biased and that they ended up cutting the CDC budget by the exact amount of money that was used to fund the gun research. They had first threatened to cut all of the funding for injury research at the CDC. They didn't do that, but they ended up cutting it by the exact amount that was spent on the gun research. More importantly, however, was that they put in a clause for the appropriations of the CDC that essentially blocked all gun research for the next 2 decades.
As you've said, Dr. Rivara, there was no congressional ban on this type of research. But Dr. Kellerman wrote in 2012, he said, no federal employee was willing to risk his or her career or the agency's funding to find out what the boundaries of these rules were. Extramural support for firearm injury prevention research quickly dried up. What was your experience of that?
It has been true. And as a result of that, many, many people stopped doing gun research. The number of publications on firearm violence decreased dramatically. Personally, it was really a frightening time. I can remember back in those days, 20 years ago, when we were really frightened about what was going to happen to our injury research program, what was going to happen to us personally, because it did feel as a personal attack. What's more is that the NRA in 1991, when some of our first research came out, wrote the National Institute of Health to get an Office of Scientific Integrity review of our research. Now, that's a big deal. There's only 2 or 3 of these that are done each year, and basically is questioning our credentials as a scientist, saying that we had lied or falsified our research. Fortunately, the NIH did not find any basis for that, and the CDC backed us up. But it was really chilling in terms of our ability to conduct research on this very important problem.
Can we talk a little bit about your, your personal experience, maybe your emotional reaction as somebody who was devoting or a good portion of their professional life to this type of research? It was peer reviewed. It was published in probably one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world. And yet political groups got a hold of it and said, nope, not true. And they vilified you. How did it feel to have your science digested and spat out by the political world?
Well, I think it was in one way frightening in that people would criticize you so vehemently about your work. On the other hand, it was also good because it told us that we were doing important work.
Dr. Fred Rivara, professor of pediatrics and epidemiology at the University of Washington at Seattle's Children's Hospital. He's been involved with injury research for 30 years. You can hear our entire series, Political Science, Where Evidence and Ideology Collide, at thetakeaway.org.
I didn't find that boring at all. I hope that you guys didn't. And it was pretty compelling what he had to say, Mike.
Yeah. I would say, depending on, back in the beginning where they talked about they went to different people's homes and they discovered a correlation between a gun in the home and a higher possibility of violent death in said home. I'd like to see the demographics on that and what type of home are we talking about? Are these legal guns? Are there drugs involved, income, education, et cetera, as to because listen, we just saw in the Bill Whittle video there, you have a murder rate of 54.6 per 100,000. How many people are living in Detroit? A couple of million, maybe?
Yeah.
And 54.6 per 100,000, that's a lot of murder in 1 year. And so if you're talking about one of those people's homes having a gun in the home when the rest of the place is pretty well gun controlled, it would raise. So, I'm saying it depends on where this home is, who the people are that own the thing. The other thing, as to the funding of the research, I don't doubt the NRA goes after a lot of stuff. Okay. So I don't doubt that they went after these people. My personal view on that is, if you want to not have to worry about your funding being cut off, why don't you go to Michael Bloomberg, who has, $1 billion, and he wants to throw hundreds of millions of dollars at this type of activity. And then you don't have to worry about somebody cutting off. But what you're griping about here is the public funds being used to come up with an intended conclusion that'll support what it is that they want to do, and somebody cut off their funding for that, and they're griping about it. So,
I would say also the NRA strikes me sometimes as a bit over the top. However, they don't get all of their funding only from businesses that will profit from this. They have a very large popular base in the United States of regular law-abiding citizens. They are powerful for a reason, and it's not just the money. And the reason that congressmen and women are feeling some kind of pressure is that they also get a lot of feedback from citizens to say, hey, we have a Second Amendment. What do you think you're doing here?
Well, not only that, is that any time that one of those people crosses them, the NRA is going to say, okay, and they're going to hit the little mass email button, and you're going to get mass email from the NRA, or it's going to show up in many of their regular publications. And, that's
we do see that from the environmental community. That
yes, we do.
Muster support very easily. And where do they get their funding? Okay. I also have to, well, I don't have to admit, but I'm going to admit, look, if I ever show up dead, I am not suicidal, okay? So, Mike, please do an investigation to find out who killed me, because there are people who are not happy with me personally. But if I was going to do something like that, slit my wrists, that's painful. Take a bunch of drug overdose? No, thanks. It's all over in a second, a quarter of a second, a millisecond with a gun.
Okay, that's the story out there. And here, let me this is a toughie. Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Because my brother committed suicide with a .22 rifle.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and
my grandfather did.
He first shot himself in the back of the head, and it didn't kill him. And I don't know at what point after this that he did this and put the thing up under his chin and pulled the trigger, which didn't kill him either. But ultimately he did die. They found him the next morning, and his door was locked from the inside, and they had to get him out of there. It took him to the hospital, and of course, there was no saving him. He was pretty well brain dead at that point in time. But I would not recommend shooting yourself with a gun. You might do it right, and you might do it horribly wrong. And so I don't recommend it.
Well, my grandfather laid down in a walnut grove that our family owned, and killed himself with a shotgun. Well, not a shotgun, with a rifle, and it affected my mother the rest of her life. Well, what do you think? Of course it did. So not recommended by this show.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll have
a PSA on that later.
Yes, we have a public service announcement. We have one more video. This one by Bill Whittle.
Yes.
I think they did a pretty good job on this, and you watch this and be patient with us of showing both sides on this issue. Please go ahead.
For crying out loud, I think we have overkilled it on the anti-gunner side here, and so pardon that we're doing a couple of videos that are pro-gun. Now this is addressing the well-regulated militia that was addressed in the Bill Maher piece, and it's essentially a parsing of the Second Amendment. Now, this has been parsed and reparsed and parsed again in order to support people who want to say that the Second Amendment applies only to a well-regulated militia and not to people, not to the people at large. So what they're going to do is that I'll just let you watch it. And
Dale and Mike show gives you a silk purse out of a sow's ear. Go ahead.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle, and this is The Firewall.
Wow.
That's dramatic.
Now, just as a quick public service announcement in these days of increasing lawlessness, federal encroachment on constitutional limits, and crybaby progressive whininess in general, I thought I might take a moment to pass out a little rhetorical ammunition to those of you who have to hear from people who, if they can no longer pretend that the Second Amendment doesn't exist, then at least try to misinterpret it to the best of their ability. The Second Amendment to the Constitution of the United States reads, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." Now, progressives read this and say that only those people in a well-regulated militia have the right to keep and bear arms. Let's find out why this is utter nonsense, shall we? Now, over at the Constitution Society, author J. Neil Schulman conducted a remarkable exercise. He sent the text of the Second Amendment not to a lawyer, but to an expert on the English language. Roy Copperand taught journalism at USC for 17 years and served on the usage panel of the American Heritage Dictionary. Merriam-Webster's dictionary frequently cites him as an expert on American English usage. Now, I'm paraphrasing their remarkable exchange here, but basically, Schulman asked Copperand the following questions. 1. Can the sentence be interpreted to grant the right to keep and bear arms solely to a well-regulated militia? Copperand replied, the sentence does not restrict the right to keep and bear arms, nor does it state or imply possession of the right elsewhere or by others than the people. It simply makes a positive statement with respect to a right of the people. Well, Schulman then asked if the right to keep and bear arms was granted by the Constitution or whether the right pre-existed the Constitution. Copperand, the right is not granted by the amendment. Its existence is assumed. The thrust of the sentence is that the right shall be preserved inviolate for the sake of ensuring a militia. Schulman then asks the next question, namely, is the right of the people to keep and bear arms conditioned upon whether or not a well-regulated militia is in fact necessary to the security of a free state? And if that condition is not existing, is the statement, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, now null and void? Copperand, no such condition is expressed or implied. The right to keep and bear arms is not said by the amendment to depend on the existence of a militia. The right to keep and bear arms is deemed unconditional by the entire sentence. Schulman concludes the exchange with an example even a progressive could understand. He sent Mr. Copperand a precisely grammatically identical sentence, which was, a well-schooled electorate being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and read books shall not be infringed. Does that mean, he asked, that only a well-schooled electorate, high school graduates, let's say, are the only ones with the right to keep and read books? To which Mr. Copperand replied, there's nothing in your sentence that either indicates or implies the possibility of a restricted interpretation. So, what does the Second Amendment actually say, according to an expert on the American usage of the English language? Well, 1, a well-regulated militia is one of the nice things that an armed population can provide, but it's not the only thing, and it's not the reason to arm the people. 2, the right to keep and bear arms is reserved to the people, not to the militia. This makes sense when you think about it, because a militia is a group of citizens who bring their own weapons with them. That's why the amendment says that the people can not only bear arms, they can keep them at home where they live. And 3rd, the right of the people to be armed is not even granted by the Second Amendment. That right is inherent in the people. And the Second Amendment says that the government cannot infringe upon that pre-existing right. Now, finally, you might hear progressives say, well, that was written back in the days of flintlock muskets. They never would have approved of such a thing in the days of automatic weapons. Why not? A flintlock musket was the deadliest weapon available at the time. Why didn't they limit their definition of arms to pointy sticks? No, the founders placed no limitations on the numbers of the weapons or on their lethality. And by the way, if the Second Amendment only applies to flintlock muskets, does that mean that your First Amendment freedom of speech only applies to what you write on parchment and quill and ink, or only as far as the sound of your voice can carry in a town square? Well, of course not. You know why? Because that would be ridiculous.
Okay, I got something to say right away about this one. And that is, looking at this situation and what we're allowed to do and not allowed to do is backwards. The reason for the amendments was to stop the government from stepping on us.
Right.
The amendments were not about what we're allowed to do. The Constitution and the amendments were all set up with the idea of keeping the government away from our natural rights.
Yes, that's right. And that's right. And this is the interesting thing that now a lot of this and how you see this depends on your perspective. If you happen to be in government, and we noticed this just today, we were having a conversation with Bill Landis outside the Ambassador Auditorium.
Bill Landis is the Grants Pass police chief. Yes, sir.
That's right. And we were, we were talking to him, and it became very, very clear to me that the topic that we were discussing was different to people on the other side of the fence. And I don't mean Democrat or Republican. I mean which side of the I'm a public servant and you're a civilian situation. So there is record of Barack Obama saying that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are a list of negative liberties. In other words, it tells the government what it cannot do. And to him, that was a bad thing. He wanted to do something about that. But it does indeed restrict the government in what they get. This is the basis of this country, is that it is different than any other in the respect that the governance in large part is in the hands of the people.
Well, this is what Mark Goins missed at his church. He was saying that people who question government can be linked to Satan worshipers. He did say that. Well, see, the backwards part about that is our founding fathers questioned the biggest government and most powerful government in the world. We're a slightly different place. And when you hear somebody say, you shouldn't be allowed to, and the government should restrict you from, buddy, you've just got it backwards. That's all. Now, I understand you want to be safe. I do understand. There's all kinds of trite phrases. You don't deserve to be safe if you don't blah, blah, or whatever. I totally understand that. But that's not what the Second Amendment's about. It's about restricting government from restricting us.
Right. No, listen, I understand. It may well be that a price that we're going to pay on a regular basis for the freedoms that we have is a higher number of gun deaths. Okay?
Absolutely.
Now, over in the UK now is the most violent country in Europe. And why is that? Why is that? They've essentially banned guns. Well, guess what? People are stabbing each other.
Knife deaths.
Deaths.
Unless you're going to interpret the Constitution and the government as restricting crazy people, well, I'd like them to do that if they could, but it needs to start in government. Thank you very much. Unless you're going to say, well, we all need to pass some kind of moral litmus test. We need to all be, put through some kind of psychological counseling before we can do anything, before we can drive a car. Really?
Yeah. Well, okay. Take the case of, Plano, Texas, and Detroit. Now, I contend that if you allow the people who are regular victims of roving drug gangs and things like that in Detroit and allow them to arm themselves and protect themselves, you will have a higher amount of gun ownership in Detroit. So that number will go up, but you also have a lesser number of shootings because, listen, you are a lot less likely to pull a drive-by on a house where you think they're going to be shooting back at you.
Well, I brought this up last night. If there was the Cave Junction School of Guns, what shooter would go there? They're going to pick an elementary school, not trying to give you ideas. Shut up. Okay, but they're going to pick some place where nobody's going to do anything. They're not going to go to a police station. When was the last time you heard somebody, well, there's wackos everywhere, but somebody walking into a police station and opening fire?
Yeah, and you know what? Listen, I may differ from some people. The president in the beginning of this said that, some people will say that we ought to have more guns. I'm one of those people. I think you have more guns in the hands of people, legally in the hands of people. And I personally think that nets you less crime. And I feel for this gal, but I think that they're freaking out over nothing. I think that her chance of being shot by somebody is less by a legal gun owner than it is by somebody who acquires their gun illegally. And I think that shows statistically. So I don't think, personally, I have a concealed handgun license. I don't carry all the time. I do carry sometimes. You'll never know when. And I am not a danger to the public. I don't believe that I'm a danger to the public. And I feel totally comfortable wherever I am if there are other people carrying concealed there. It doesn't bother me in the slightest. As a matter of fact,
says that just to watch you is a tragedy, Mike.
Yes. Well, it is a tragedy. She may be right about that, but for a different reason.
Yeah, it's bad for her. But look, the other thing, I differ slightly about this, and that I'm not going to be carrying a weapon. Well, of course, you'll never know. But I still contend that a closer presence of some kind of thing to stop a shooter would be welcome in most places that are vulnerable, and what's not, to a shooting. And so maybe we're just putting those weapons just a little too far away. They need to be in the hands of trained people. And if I was going to college now, I think I might welcome the idea that there was some kind of deterrence on campus.
Yeah. Listen, I think that's a good compromise in this whole deal. You have some people that want there to be a bunch of people there with concealed handguns. There are other people that would like to have no guns there. And the compromise is let's have a trained teacher in the classrooms that has access to a gun. Maybe it's not open right in his drawer there, but it's in some sort of locked case that he can easily get to quickly, and that he's had some training. I believe that's a fantastic compromise.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you to everybody out there. Thanks for being patient while we're showing all these videos. Show's gone over just a little bit, but we're hoping that this will add to the dialogue and add statistics and some thought process to it. And let's just be a little more tolerant of other points of views. Can we do that?